Thank you, Oscar. It's great to be here again. Let me see if I can figure this out here. Lynn? Seems to have disappeared. Thank you. How many of you were here in 2004 at the conference we had in Shanghai? Show of hands. I was here, a few of us. There we go. So that was 9 years ago, and it's great to be back in Shanghai. There are a lot more tall buildings today than there were 9 years ago. There's some other things that have changed dramatically since 2004 as well. We'll talk about some of those as well. I'm going to spend the next 30 or so minutes talking about why Asia matters, how it looks in the context of the global market, and some rules for how to transform going forward. With us today is Greg Sterling. For those of you who don't know Greg Sterling and I worked together at the Kelsey Group for 8 years, 6 years, 6.5 years. And Greg is standing in because Charles Laughlin, who many of you know, was unable to join us because he had some obligations that he had to take care of back in the States. So we really appreciate Greg coming over and joining us. Greg's a great source of insight and knowledge about this industry. I'll promote his blog because that way he doesn't have to. It's called screenwork.com, and it's it's up on the screen. I'll show it in a second. But he really does write a terrific blog that all of you should follow, and he's really quite an insightful person. So I hope you get a chance to visit with Greg and meet him as well. So it's sort of a little bit of Kelsey Group homecoming. I left the Kelsey Group about 2 years ago. Greg left 6 years ago or so. And yes, largely because Greg and I couldn't get along very well. But no, we've continued our friendship, and hopefully we'll bring a lot of value during the next couple days. So, did I press the right button? There we go. Okay, it's the bottom button. So, meeting objectives, gain some insight, learn from others. There are people at your table that I'm sure you can learn something from. Anticipate the future, prepare for tomorrow, transform your business, and be sure to network. Having run conferences for the Kelsey Group, how many of you have ever been to a Kelsey Group conference, either in the States? A number of you. Conferences are really as much about the content as it is about the opportunity to talk to people outside of the sessions and learn from them. So we really hope that you spend a lot of time networking and learning from others at your table, at dinner tonight, during lunches. Again, the moderators, myself, I was head of the Kelsey Group. I've been in this industry for 20 years, and now I'm an independent advisor to companies in this space. As I said, Greg Sterling, former Kelsey Group partner, now principal at Sterling Market Intelligence. There's his URL, screenwork.com. And he's head of an Internet-to-Go advisory service. And Peter Buxton, 30-year independent industry consultant, principal of Buxton Independent Consulting. So we'll all be up here moderating the session and ask questions. These events are only as good as the kinds of questions that we get from the audience. So we really encourage questions. So when we last gathered here in Shanghai, I put this slide together. You'll notice that the number of mobile users, subscribers in China went from 334 million to over 1.1 billion today. 9 years. Indonesia, I picked a few countries, I didn't put them all up. Indonesia, mobile subscribers advanced from 30 million to 282 million. Japan, which had already developed pretty well in the mobile space, had only grown about 40 million, 45 million. And the US went from 185 million subscribers to 310 million subscribers. So, we have a presentation a little later this morning from Kerry Bunks. He's involved in the mobile space. mobile is clearly something that needs to be top of mind for everyone here. When we last gathered in Shanghai in 2004, the percent of the population using the internet changed rapidly too. China, only 7.3% of the population of China was using the internet. Today, 42% of the population. Indonesia went up by 5 times. Japan, relatively small increases in the US because both of those companies were so well developed. So the message here is that, as all of you know, is that the internet and mobile are advancing very rapidly. And then perhaps most importantly, there have been new technologies that have come into play. 4G is around, WeChat, which is a messaging platform here in China. 3G came around, something called Facebook, something called the iPhone, LTE, which is a fast mobile service, something called Twitter, something called social and Instagram, all happening in the course of 9 years. Pretty substantial change in that period. And I think if there's one change that is most dominant is, in my mind, is the whole impact of social in this world and how consumers are looking and finding where they're going to shop and where they're going to buy from through social needs. And it's going to only get bigger and more important as we look forward. A couple numbers to consider. 12x 54% and 29.5. Does anyone want to guess what those numbers mean? Greg?
I was going to make a joke about getting older and better.
Yes. Well, Asia's 12 times the size of the US. If you look at it in just sheer size. 54% of the world's population is here in Asia. And interestingly, the median age is 29.5 years old. So it is a very, very young population that you can imagine if you think about the intersection of mobile devices, social media, age. It's just the differences between what it's been and where it's going are really, really quite dramatic. 3 more numbers to consider. Greg, paying attention? I'm just checking to see. No, he's tweeting. You're allowed to tweet, I guess, from this hotel, which is very good. 3 more numbers to consider. 27% internet penetration. So there's access. 21% social penetration, but those using social are doing it very intensely. And 82% mobile penetration. So these things are all driving very, very large changes in what's going on in the marketplace. And then, of course, there are a whole lot of people. 3.784 billion people. Some places, if you look it up, the number, it says 4.1 billion. Whatever the number is, in just raw scale and scope and size, Asia as a marketplace is clearly the most important marketplace in the world today. I was watching an interview with the chairman of Starbucks. You all know Starbucks? Everybody knows Starbucks coffee? And he was talking about how Asia represented, they bought a new brand called Teavana. Teavana is a tea brand that they bought. They have store locations. And the interviewer asked them, so are you going to roll out more coffee stores in Asia? And he said, no, we're going to change the way tea is done in Asia. They're going to take their model that they learned about from building Starbucks as a global brand, and they're going to apply that to the tea world. So, and they're going to invest billions of dollars, probably billions of dollars before it's all said and done, to grow that marketplace and to change the way tea is thought of in Asia. That's kind of an interesting thought, to think that Starbucks believes they can change the way the people in Asia think about tea. That's a pretty fundamental change. There's plenty of shopping and engaging as well, 61% of the people look for a product or brand online. 63% purchase a product online. 66% do banking online. 69% watch a video, and 70% do email. I'm sure there are other numbers for other countries. I think one of the ones to watch in the coming years is there's a tremendous amount of video that's being watched in Asia. Tremendous amount of video. And as you think about your own business and how you are either helping your customers reach the consumer or how you're reaching the consumer as your own brand, I think video is going to play a more and more important role every day going forward. So one last number to consider, 60%. 60% is the use of social media when making a purchase decision in Asia. 60% of the consumers in Asia use social media when making a purchase decision. That has very large and broad implications for the marketplace. So a whole lot has changed in 9 years. For instance, I pulled these numbers together. Google, thank you Google for being here today and sponsoring. The share price of Google when we met in 2004 was $100 US. Share price of Google today is $1,000, 10 times. Now that market cap is $339 billion today. I presume if I just did the simple math, it was $33 billion 10 years ago. Pretty phenomenal change. Apple, everybody, how many iPhones? How many iPads? How many iMacs, okay? Very big business here in Asia. $31 a share, now $525 a share, at a market valuation of $477 billion. If you were to do some quick math, it was probably a $200 or $100 billion market cap stock. And the third one on this slide really didn't exist. Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook in February of 2004. We met here in Shanghai in, maybe it was November of 2004. Facebook had just started 9 short years ago, and now Facebook, actually looks like a shrimp on this chart. It's a small number, 126 billion, but in terms of users and viewership, at least in many parts of Asia, perhaps not in China so much, but in many parts of Asia, it's a very dominant and very powerful global brand. So a lot has changed in 9 years. But you might ask yourself, so what? What's all this have to do, Neal? How can this help my business? Greg and I have been building forecasts for this industry for a long time. And probably when 2004, when we last met, the forecast probably looked at 2 lines. What was print Yellow Pages going to do? And what was IYP going to do? And we probably put out forecasts and said print revenue is probably going to be pretty flat and IYP is going to grow really fast. And back then there was very little talk about search engine marketing, search engine optimization, mobile, video. Some talk about the web, websites. Very little discussion about blogs. Very little discussion about social. Very little discussion about connectivity or even business processes. I would argue today that you need to rethink what your market definition is. If you believe that your market definition is what's on the left-hand side of this chart, print, Yellow Pages, and IYP, I'd argue that you're going to have a rough go of it going forward because it's not a sustainable business all by itself. It will not be a sustainable business by itself. So let me take you through some of the forecast numbers that I've developed, and this forecast will continue to evolve over the next couple months as I interview more people. And one of the offers that I made to Oscar this morning is that we might work collaboratively to build an Asia forecast by country so that all of you have a very granular view of the marketplace. And that would require some cooperation with you all, but it's something that we might do with ALSMA in the coming year. So on a global basis, when you look at, let's see if I can go back. When you look at what's on the right-hand side here, all those items, I've put all those items into this forecast. This is not an advertising forecast. This is really a forecast of the global SMB market opportunity as it relates to a variety of products and services, not simply advertising. And it's a big business. $423 billion today, going to $602 billion by 2018. Very large-scale business. And if you look at it in terms of spend by those buckets of stuff, those buckets of services, advertising is really a relatively small piece of the pie. $100 billion. Not small by any means, but not the largest piece either. There are things like wireless phones and web hosting in this, and even accounting. One of the things I've learned as I've done a lot of work around the world is that in many parts of the world, accounting systems don't exist. Accounting software doesn't exist for small businesses. But if you think about the intersection of the phone and how consumers are buying more and more on their phones, there's going to be now a more and more clear paper trail of how accounting gets done and how receipts are managed. And so, I would argue that in the next 5 years, we'll see more small businesses really by being forced to build accounting software, or use accounting software, because so much of their transaction stuff is going to happen through phones. And the phones will create a paper trail for that. Oh, wrong way. And by 2018, you can see that advertising slice of the pie gets smaller in terms of dollars. So there's no inflation numbers in here. These are just dollar amounts. And I'll share all of these slides with everyone. So nobody has to, write all these numbers down. There are a lot of numbers up here. But that's what it looks like by 2018. And in terms of percentage, today advertising is about 24% of that pie chart. Things like social posts and blogging are very small pieces of that. Point of sale. In the US, there's a company called Square. Anybody familiar with Square? A couple people. Square is the new point of sale platform. Instead of the credit card reader that has been offered by the bank, it's a very light system. It plugs into your iPad, you swipe the card, and you process the transaction. So Square is going to change all this, or platforms like Square will change this dramatically. And by 2018, advertising is an even smaller piece of the overall pie. I'd argue that advertising is going to be critically important, but if anybody is going to rest their business and depend on the advertising piece of the world, I think it's going to be a very challenging marketplace. As if you define advertising as just the acquisition of customers through traditional media of some sort, whether it's digital or whether it's traditional or digital. So this is a slide that looks at that same global market opportunity shared by region. And you can see that in 2013, North America and Europe account for nearly 77%. But in 5 years, that number will go down to 64%. 13 percentage point drop. And Asia will grow from 13% to 21% of that global number of $602 billion. So a very, very significant opportunity in Asia. And this number looks at the spend in those markets. So, for instance, North America will go from 136 billion to 160 billion. But Asia will go from 54 billion to to $123 billion as you look across the time frame. Now, in terms of those various slices of what I would call the business process system, what you see here is that advertising has a much smaller share by 2018 than it does today, from 24% down to 13%. Even wireless phones will lose some share. Where the shares will grow is in blogging, which is a social related media, social posts, posting on social platforms, point of sale solutions, even web hosting should grow as a percentage. And I used some fairly conservative penetration numbers, which I'll show you in a few minutes, about how, and fairly low price points. I didn't use price points that we would see in the US for a lot of these services. I used very low price points for Asia. So they are large businesses. And if you think about, again, the confluence of, or the intersection of mobile and social, there's naturally going to be this large development in how businesses manage their consumer experience in that social world. And I'd argue that businesses don't have time to manage it themselves, and that there are players and partners who are going to have to help them manage that. So in terms of Asia specifically, about a $54 billion market today, growing to, as I said, $123 billion. And Asia versus North America, a significant increase in Asia as it relates to North America, and North America looking relatively flat over the next 5 years. North America, money will move from one media to a different media. Money will move from one accounting platform, maybe to a cloud-based accounting platform, but there won't be tremendous growth in the United States and North America like we're going to see in Asia and actually other parts of the world. I've done this forecast for Latin America as well, which is another large growth opportunity. And so here's the numbers by the Asia market. I have advertising actually declining from 11% to 5% of that overall bucket. Now the bucket of money is much larger. So 5% of $123 billion will still be a lot of money. But in terms of percentage share, it's going to decline. And as I said earlier, things like blogging and social posts and point of sales tools and those kind of cloud-based transformative tools and applications, I believe are going to grow significantly over the course of the period. You may jump in anytime, Greg. Yes. It's your turn.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes.
So I just want to interject something which is maybe fairly self-evident to the audience from this, that I think is an important point if it's not obvious to people, which is there are some fairly radical product implications if you accept what Neal is saying about what publishers should be selling to their small business customers, their advertisers. However, there's a caveat or an important question that comes up immediately thereafter, which is what can publishers do competently, effectively themselves? What do they need to partner with other people to deliver to the market? And what is the scope of the offering? These are just sort of rhetorical questions for now. But this is the stuff I think that we should be discussing and that you should be thinking about. And feel free to challenge these assumptions as well.
I think Greg brings up one of the really critical points is that I'm not suggesting publishers start to build point-of-sale systems and put that into their product line. What I'm suggesting is that those point-of-sale systems need a distribution partner to get out to the marketplace. And so much of, I think, what the next 10 years of this industry will be less about internal product development and much more about partner development and partner management, because that's really where the opportunity is. What this industry has had, and and continues to have are people who go out and talk to small businesses. Square, the company that I mentioned that has the point of sale solution, they're never going to field a large scale sales force. Google, who's here today, has no intention of fielding a large scale sales force. They're trying to partner. They're working as partners with people. So if there's a internal competency that I would argue will, over the next 10 years, will be perhaps the most critical internal competency in any of your businesses, it will be the partnering skill. How do you create partnerships where there's value being driven to both the publisher and the partner in a way that's equitable and is sustainable? I think that really will be the biggest challenge in the next decade, let's say, or 9 years if we meet again here in Shanghai in 9 years. That will really be the defining piece of the puzzle, is how do you as publishers figure out partnerships that work for you and work for the provider and work for the merchant at the same time. That really will be the most critical challenge, don't you think, Greg? This is not about building all these products, it's about putting them into a bag and figuring out what those partner relationships are.
I agree with that. I mean, one of the things that former Apple CEO Steve Jobs, yes? Okay. One of the things that stuck with me in the wake of Steve Jobs' death, former Apple CEO and founder Steve Jobs' death, was the idea that Apple said no to certain kinds of things. They made decisions about what not to include in products. And I think that's as important a decision as what you start to look at, is that there are certain things that you want to include and certain things that you absolutely will not include. You can't do everything well, even if you're working with partners, which I agree with Neal's point, is that a lot of the innovation will come from startups. But what are the core things that must be included and that you can sell effectively, and what things might you not include? And of course, the market will evolve and change, and you have to be prepared to change. But you can't do everything.
And I think companies that try and do everything will also run into significant challenges. This is the slide that looks at the dollars by category. Web hosting, which I have at a very relatively low penetration number and a low per month price, is a large business. If you think about most of the world in whatever time frame, 5 years, most of the consumer market that has any disposable money will have a smartphone. They will most likely be searching for businesses on their smartphone. And if they don't find those businesses, because either those businesses don't have a responsive site, everybody know what a responsive site is? Responsive sites are sites that you can see on multiple devices. Greg's got a Nexus, I've got an iPad, somebody has an iPhone. Websites that can be viewed on multiple devices. Unless they can be found, they won't have any business as time moves forward. And similarly, blogging and social posts have the potential to be very large-scale businesses, as so much of the marketplace is deeply into and building on their social media. And then, of course, there's that process piece about point of sale, which will happen naturally as products and services are bought and sold via mobile devices over time. So all that's going to change dramatically. These are some of the penetration numbers I actually used, and we could debate these, and I'm happy to debate these. And you can say, oh, that assumption is way off, or that assumption is pretty decent. But these are some of the assumptions behind the forecast I put out there. So you see advertising in this marketplace, 20% of the marketplace will be doing some form of what I would call more traditional advertising. Well, as many as 50% will have to have some point of sale transaction device as everybody starts buying through their phones. So maybe that number is potentially, fairly high. I'd love to have the conversation and the debate, because in my little laboratory in California, I need some input from the real world to start to make these numbers even more precise over time. And maybe we can do that as part of an ALSMA project.
Neal, I'm wondering if we should invite people to ask questions. I'm mindful of the time.
Yeah. Questions? Yeah.
Here, let me bring a mic down to you.
Can you define what's computer?
You can think of it as a tablet or a PC.
So it's a hardware.
It's some sort of hardware device.
Second question, how do you monitorize blogging so high?
As a percent here? Because I think that businesses are going to have some stream of content about their business that's out there on a pretty perpetual basis in order to be current, right?
You could argue that that blogging function will take place on social media sites.
Yeah.
And people might not have their own blogs that are hosted. So the idea of communicating socially with consumers is, I think, a valid assumption. We could debate where that happens and what the revenues are. Other questions? No?
I'm going to do 3 more slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to James, because I think that'll get us right up to about the timing, right? Yes?
Just to add to your Starbucks thing, I read somewhere that they are going into
Starbucks is going into food, yes. Well, they bought a brand in the U.S., a bakery brand in the U.S. And, Starbucks is really a large logistics company. They know how to open stores, they have a formula, and they apply that formula whether it's to coffee or food now or tea later. They have a large process system, and that's why they've been so successful, because they can keep the quality consistent across all their stores because they have great process. So let me finish this up, because I think it's important. I think you have to think about shifting the value creation opportunity from not just delivering leads that convert, which is a good business and you need to remain in that business, but it is highly competitive. If you have your own and operated media, it's sustainable. If you're looking at reselling other people's traffic, that's a very challenging business. There is high churn. You're another media seller. There's a lower valuation on that business over time. The value per customer might be $300 to $500 per year. If you add in what I described, some of those other services and products, it is still highly competitive. I'm not going to say it's not a competitive space. But the deeper you are involved with the small business, the harder it will be for them to turn you off as a partner. Ultimately, that's really what you're trying to do. You want to find ways to put more hooks into that small business so that they cannot churn off your business. And that's probably the single biggest challenge all publishers around the world are facing today, is the issue of churn. And the issue of how to keep your customers committed to you. And I would argue, and I think Greg would agree with me, that selling advertising used to be in a yellow page world, print yellow page world, it was relatively easy to keep people around because they didn't have any alternatives. Now that's a much harder challenge, and so you need to help these small businesses not just acquire customers, but grow their customers, activate and retain those customers, and even delight those customers. Through whatever, whether it's email programs, whether it's social posting, what have you, you have to have more hooks into that small business.
And Neal, there's some excellent points I think Paul Plant is going to make later this morning that tie right in with this theme of customer retention.
Then I'm setting you up well, Paul, right?
As you always do.
Yes, as I always do. So I'm going to finish there and say that the future is really about executing against both value propositions, delivering leads which convert, and driving long-term customer value. You've got to put them together. Simply doing one or the other is not going to be sustainable and sufficient in the long term. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to James Saunders. Please welcome James Saunders. He was here last year. He's the head of, I'll let him describe what his title is. They move titles around fairly rapidly at Google sometimes. So James Saunders, come on up.